Namaste and welcome back to Waking Up with Mindful Serenity. Again, we're going to answer another question from the jar, and I'm going to attempt to answer it within a 10-minute time frame. These answers will be far from perfect. They will be coming from my own collection of information that I've gathered over the years and my assimilation of that knowledge. Again, I know very little, and the more I think I know, the less I know. So it's just a matter of tapping into some deeper wisdom that's in all of us, and it's that I attempt to use to answer the question with. That wisdom that we all share, if you want to call it wisdom, coming from this little human I call me. Regardless of that, I will pull a question from the jar. I will start my timer if I can find it here. And 10 minutes begins. I am going to look at the question now. Hopefully I can make it out. The question I pulled out, is it important to be educated? Is it important to be educated? So, I'm going to take a deep breath. Is it important to be educated? And I'm assuming, and again, this is an assumption that the person means, is it important to be formally educated? I've always been big on it. I have been an educator for many years of my life, so I've been very big on education, and I have always, felt that education in all realms is important to our development as human beings. On egoic level, I became very attached to education, and I wanted more education. Did not get the graduate degrees that I wanted, so I have always felt a little less than because I never had that, and I still have this ego notion in me. I still have remnants of my ego, and those remnants are telling me, go get your PhD, do this, do that, you have to have that, which I don't think is important, but to the ego it is. So education is important in a lot of ways. There's not just formal education. Most of the education we gain over our lifetimes is informal, through our life experiences, through what we go through on a day-to-day basis, what life presents to us as it unfolds in front of us, how we learn to deal with that, and how we learn better the next time to deal with it differently if we have to, or to improve our reaction or response to it, to these circumstances that are constantly occurring until we do learn. So education is very important. Whether or not formal education is important is debatable. Some people will say that formal education actually hinders our growth spiritually because it fills us with all these dogmas and doctrines and this conditioning, a social kind of construct, a social kind of conformity and control assists in that type of education to get us to act a certain way in the societies that we belong to. Whether the formal educational systems we are learning under are the school systems, which are based on societal values, or on our church systems, which are based on religious values, depending on what type of religion we may ascribe to. And then there is the informal education, which is the people we hang around with, the families we live in, what we learn from them through conditioning, what is right and wrong morally, how do I act in these situations, will I get punished for acting a certain way, will I get rewarded for acting a certain way. That's all education. And so we get conditioned through education to behave a certain way, to act a certain way, to respond to life a certain way. And whether that education is going to be beneficial in the long run or if it's just going to serve the ego, again, is questionable, depending on how we were raised and how we were conditioned to be. So these educations can have a very positive influence on us. They can help stimulate the brain to want to learn more and do more and understand more about science and mathematics and poetry and English literature and history and all this. But we have to be very aware that in these systems, what we're getting is just a filtered view of these things, right? We're getting, someone has looked at, say, poetry or certain great works of literature and said, okay, this is what we're going to teach in the school system. This is going to be banned. This is going to be censored. This is going to be allowed. And we will teach them that based on these societal values that are leading the educational system. So we get a very filtered view of life through these educational systems when it comes to these arts and sciences and whatnot, right? The only one pure probably is mathematics, because you can't do anything with it. And of course, that was one course in my life that I hated and had a hard time with. But a lot of our education is filtered by society as it comes to streams through the educational system. So, and even our history, we know large chunks of historical data are missing from textbooks, depending on societal's values and what society wanted its inhabitants to know and not know. So we lose a lot of the truth. And my own history section, we had very little education on the Indigenous people from this country in Canada. And that they were here much longer than the settlers that came over, but it all was based on the settlers and that history, with the English and the French and all that, rather than on the Indigenous people. We didn't get enough information on that, and in the United States, might not have had enough on the black populations. So that was missing from historical texts and whatnot. So that education is very limited and very filtered based on societal values. So we have to be very wary about that when the educational system. There's so much more to learn than what we're being taught. And what we're being taught may be filtered and biased, and we have to understand that as we learn, regardless of what subject we're taking in a formal educational system. And of course, if it's a religious educational system, then we're going to see even more bias based on that dogma that belongs to that educational system. So we're going to be limited in what we can learn and grow from as far as education in the formal systems. Now, what we learn from our family, of course, is probably going to have more of an impact on us, whether we know it or not, because we're going to learn how to behave and how to feel and how to think, what is right, what is wrong in those processes. And so often the consequences of not adhering to that dogma or that doctrine can be even more severe, in the sense that we don't want to be ostracized or rejected by our family, which is our support people. Especially when we're children, we have that fantastical thinking that our parents are always right and what they say has to be right, and if I don't agree with it, they have to say there's something wrong with me. And so we don't live authentically often because of that type of educational doctrine. Then with our peers, of course, in a society, when we branch out with our peers and we're wanting to belong and we want to agree with them, so we want to learn what they learn, know what they know, act like they want, so whatever inner knowing we have inside us throughout all these processes gets squished way down underneath, and we forget that we know so much already, that we have this internalized wisdom within us, this knowing that comes from some greater energy field, if you want to use that word energy field without it getting too woo-woo for you, which I totally believe with quantum physics, right? The quantum field. So we have all this energy, all this knowing that we already have. We have this collective genetic knowing within us from our ancestors. Carl Jung would have called it collective consciousness. It's ancestral. It's genetically implanted into our DNA now. We've learned through trial and error what our ancestors have learned through trial and error, and it has been absorbed into our sense of knowing and education system, and it comes innately when we are born, and it's not necessarily something we have to learn and be educated on. So we have that as well, and sometimes when we put all our attention on the formal education systems or the external education systems, we don't recognize this knowing, because a lot of times that external education system is telling us to suppress and repress that knowing, that it's not real, right? And we talk about science, for example, and science is something we learn in our formal education systems, and that's telling us that anything that cannot be seen or felt with the five senses, perceived with the five senses, is not real. So therefore, push it down. This idea of intuition is not real. You just have the brain, the consciousness is in the brain, it's in matter. Matter is all there is, so anything outside of matter is not real. And this inner knowing we have, this field where this inner knowing comes from, is not something that science can quantify or even measure, because we can't see it, right? So that gets squished down by one educational system, squishes down the inner knowing that we already have. So is education, is it important to be educated? It's important to to know, to learn, to be willing to learn, to be open to learn. But learning only occurs, and I know this as an educator for many years, that the students only learn when they're ready to learn. So the true education that we want to pass on is this idea that we are not just this matter, right? We want to go beyond what we've been conditioned through education to believe we are and what the world is, and to explore beyond that, use that scientific questioning mind that we all have to explore beyond that and not limit what we know because it doesn't adhere to what we learned in formal education, that it goes beyond it. So education is important in many ways. Formal education, I have no problem with it. I still may go get my PhD someday. Here I'm old, but I still might go. Who knows? It's just some ego thing. If my remnants of my ego still remain after a few years, who knows? You may hear that I've gotten my PhD. And I want my children, I've always wanted my children, I want everyone to be educated, to make the most of this educational experience that we have, to be having this opportunity to go to school and learn all these wonderful things, as long as we know their limitations and know that there's some bias and some filtering going on to what we receive in the school system, and to be willing to go and explore the informal education that's out there. Go out and experience nature, walk in nature, question everything, even that which goes beyond the doctrine we're picking up in our educational system. So to explore beyond formal education. So education in all its forms is important. Just recognizing the limits in the formal education system, be willing to explore in the informal education systems by allowing life to be our greatest teacher, because it is our greatest teacher, and we want life to teach, and we want to be open and willing to learn what we're here to learn. Well, my time is up. Thank you so much for joining me. Have an amazing day. Namaste.